At 7:30 in the morning, high above enemy territory, an American bomber formation cut through broken clouds over China. Inside one of those aircraft, a single man was about to break every rule the United States Army Air Forces had taught its gunners. Not out of rebellion, not out of ego, but because he had done the math, and the math said the rules were getting men killed. Japanese Zero fighters were already climbing. Dozens of them. They always did the same thing. They watched the sky for glowing tracer rounds. Those bright orange streaks told them everything they needed to know. Where the American gunner was sitting, which turret was firing, and exactly where to aim their cannons. Most bomber gunners never survived the first attack. They didn't die because they were slow. They died because their own bullets betrayed them. But one gunner refused to play that game. He removed every tracer round from his ammunition belts. No glow, no streaks, no warning, just invisible bullets moving faster than sound. When the Japanese fighters attacked, they couldn't see where the fire was coming from. Pilots died without ever knowing who killed them. That decision turned a forgotten enlisted gunner into the deadliest defensive shooter the Pacific War had ever seen. In 2 missions, he would destroy more enemy aircraft than most fighter pilots did in an entire career. He would change bomber combat tactics across multiple air forces. And then, just as his name should have become famous, he would vanish into occupied China, captured, erased, and officially forgotten. No parades, no headlines, no Medal of Honor, just a simple question buried in military archives decades later. How did one bomber gunner outscore fighter aces, and why did almost nobody remember his name? This is the story of invisible fire. This is the story of a man who understood that survival in war is not about courage. It's about eliminating the thing that gets you killed. Before the war turned the skies over Asia into killing grounds, Arthur Benno had already spent most of his life learning how bullets behave. He was not born into the military. He was not trained by doctrine. He did not grow up dreaming of medals or uniforms. He grew up in Bisbee, Arizona, a hard mining town carved into copper hills where precision mattered more than noise. In the late 1920s, while other young men chased weekend entertainment, Benno chased groupings on paper targets. He learned early that shooting was not about instinct. It was mathematics. Angle, lead, drop. Timing. By the time most men his age were still figuring out who they were, Benno already knew exactly what he was good at. He built his own ammunition. He tested different loads. He adjusted sights by fractions. He practiced until muscle memory replaced conscious thought. When competitive rifle circuits expanded across the western United States in the 1930s, his name began appearing near the top. Not first every time, but always close. Always consistent. That consistency mattered more than trophies. When the United States edged closer to war, Benno was already past the age recruiters preferred. 30 years old, older than most new enlistees by a decade. On paper, nothing special. But when the recruiting sergeant saw his shooting records, the conversation ended quickly. Benno wasn't sent to basic infantry training. He was redirected straight into aerial gunnery. At Las Vegas Army Airfield, instructors noticed the difference immediately. While other trainees relied on tracer rounds to correct their aim, Benno rarely looked for them. His bursts were short, controlled, efficient. He didn't chase targets, he waited for them to arrive exactly where they needed to be. He graduated at the top of his class. By early 1943, Benno was halfway around the world. Assigned to the 374th Bomb Squadron, 308th Bomb Group, flying B-24 Liberators out of China. Their mission profile was brutal. Long flights, no fighter escort, enemy territory from takeoff to landing. Japanese airfields dotted the landscape below them like traps. The bomber he crewed was a B-24D Liberator nicknamed the Goon. Benno's position was the most exposed one on board, the top turret. From there, he could see everything: incoming fighters, tracer streams, exploding aircraft, falling men. He also saw something else most gunners ignored: patterns. Japanese Zero pilots didn't attack randomly. They watched first. They waited for tracer fire. Those glowing orange lines were guides, not just for American gunners, but for Japanese attackers. Tracers told them which gun was active, where the gunner was sitting, and exactly where to concentrate fire. Once a turret revealed itself, it became the priority target. Most gunners never questioned this. Tracers were regulation. Tracers were doctrine. Tracers were necessary. Benno disagreed. The first night he inspected his ammunition belts in China, he knew immediately what would happen in combat. Bright streaks would appear in the sky. Japanese pilots would follow them back, and the man behind the gun would die before his second burst. So, Benno did something no manual recommended. He sat alone in the armament tent and dismantled his belts, one round at a time. He removed every tracer. He replaced them with standard ball ammunition. No phosphorus, no glow, no visual signature, just mass and velocity. Other gunners thought he had lost his mind. How do you aim without tracers? How do you correct fire? How do you know where your rounds are going? Benno didn't argue. He didn't lecture. He simply trusted 15 years of experience that told him something simple. If you understand trajectory, you don't need glowing bullets to explain it to you. the armorer warned him. His squadron commander reminded him that tracers were standard issue. Benno listened and then flew with his modified belts anyway. His first combat mission with pure ball ammunition was quiet, not because nothing happened, but because nothing pointed back at him. Japanese fighters attacked other bombers first. Tracer streams from waist guns and tail turrets lit the sky like road signs. Benno watched enemy pilots follow those glowing paths straight to their sources. He stayed invisible. Then came October 31st, 1943, Halloween morning over southern China. Broken clouds at 12,000 feet. A formation of American B-24s droned toward their target. From below, nearly 30 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters began climbing to intercept. This was not unusual. What happened next was as the Japanese closed in, Benno waited. He did not fire early. He did not reveal himself. He tracked the lead fighter through his reflector sight, calculated closure rate, waited for geometry to favor him. When he fired, there were no tracers, no warning, just sudden destruction. The Zero's canopy shattered. The aircraft rolled away and vanished into cloud. Seconds later, another exploded. Then another. Japanese pilots reacted with confusion. They saw bombers taking fire, but they couldn't see where it was coming from. Other gunners were not so lucky. Their tracer fire lit up the sky. Japanese fighters followed the glowing paths back to exposed turrets. Bombers fell out of formation. Men died in seconds. Benno did not dot by the time the formation turned for home. Multiple Japanese fighters burned below. Benno's gun camera recorded every engagement. Intelligence officers would later confirm the results. A single gunner, using no tracers, had destroyed more enemy aircraft in minutes than most crews managed in weeks. But the most important thing wasn't the kill count. It was the lesson. Invisible fire worked. Within days, other gunners began copying him. Quietly, no official order, no paperwork, just survival instincts spreading faster than doctrine. Tracers disappeared from belts across the squadron. Then the group, then other units. Arthur Benno didn't announce a revolution. He simply removed the thing that was getting people killed. And the war over China was about to test that decision harder than ever before. Halloween morning was supposed to be just another mission, another line in a logbook, another chance to survive long enough to fly the next one. But what happened over southern China on October 31st, 1943, quietly rewrote how bomber crews thought about staying alive. When the B-24s returned to base that afternoon, the debriefing room was tense. Some crews were missing. Some aircraft came back riddled with holes. Others didn't come back at all. That part was familiar. What wasn't familiar was the gun camera footage. Intelligence officers rolled the film again and again. Japanese fighters appeared, closed in, and then disintegrated. No tracer streams. No visible warning. Just sudden impacts and falling aircraft. One gunner's camera showed more confirmed kills than entire crews normally claimed across several missions. Arthur Benno didn't celebrate. He didn't boast. When asked how he did it, he didn't give a speech. He showed his ammunition belt. No tracers. That was it. At first, the reaction was disbelief. Tracers were doctrine. Tracers were safety. Tracers were how gunners corrected fire under stress. Removing them sounded reckless until the casualty lists were compared. Bombers, whose gunners used tracers, had taken the heaviest losses. Bombers whose gunners fired invisible rounds survived more often. Within days, the change spread quietly, informally, without orders. Men sat in armament tents at night doing exactly what Benno had done, pulling belts apart one round at a time, stripping out the glowing bullets that betrayed them. No memos, no approvals, just survival. By the second week of November, half the gunners in the 308th Bomb Group were flying without tracers. By the third week, most of them were. Enemy pilots began making mistakes. They attacked the loudest guns, the brightest streaks, the obvious threats, and they died to the ones they couldn't see. Benno's reputation grew, but not the way fighter aces' reputations did. There were no headlines, no victory tallies painted on aircraft noses. He was an enlisted man, sealed inside a metal turret, doing his job better than anyone else in the sky. His confirmed kills climbed steadily, 8, 10, 12. But numbers weren't what worried him. He knew luck didn't last forever. Every mission over China was flown without escort. Fuel was tight, weather unpredictable. Japanese airfields ringed the coast and interior. And as American tactics evolved, so did Japanese responses. Pilots began attacking in pairs, then in coordinated groups from multiple angles at once. Overlapping fields of fire designed to overwhelm defensive guns. By mid-November, intelligence briefings warned of heavier resistance near major ports. Hong Kong was one of them. On November 14, 1943, 14 B-2 for liberators from the 308th Bomb Group lifted off before dawn. Their target was Japanese shipping in Hong Kong harbor. The briefing was optimistic. Light opposition, maybe a dozen fighters. Quick in, quick out. It was wrong. As the formation approached the coast, Japanese radar stations had already detected them. Fighters were scrambled from multiple airfields, not 12, more than 30. Arthur Benno saw them first. Through broken cloud layers, Dots began rising fast. Too many, too organized. He counted automatically. 1, 2, 5, 10, 20. More disparate. Wasn't an interception, it was a trap. The zeros didn't rush. They formed up. They waited until the bombers were committed. Then they attacked together. High, low, left, right, forcing gunners to split their attention. It was the most dangerous kind of engagement for a bomber crew. Benno stayed calm. He ignored distant targets. He waited for geometry. When he fired, aircraft vanished. One burst, one kill, again and again. Invisible fire tearing through cockpits and engines before pilots understood. They were under attack, but even skill couldn't stop physics. The goon took damage. Engines hit, oil pressure dropping, smoke trailing behind them. Captain Samuel Skousen fought to hold formation, but a crippled bomber doesn't get mercy. Japanese pilots peeled off from the main fight and focused on the straggler. This was where most bombers died. 6 zeros broke toward. The goon Benno saw them separate into pairs, a classic kill pattern. He didn't panic. He prioritized. High threats first. Short bursts. Precision. One fighter burned, then another, then another. The sky filled with debris and smoke. But the bomber was bleeding altitude. Systems were failing. Hydraulics gone. Control surfaces damaged. One engine dead. Another overheating. They were still miles from friendly territory. Benno checked his ammunition counter, less than half. Remaining. The fighters kept coming. He cleared a jam under fire. Seconds felt like minutes. A zero filled his sight picture. Too close now to miss. He fired. The fighter disintegrated. 10 enemy aircraft damaged or destroyed in minutes. No bomber gunner in the Pacific had ever done this. But records don't matter when gravity wins. Captain Skousen made the call. Bail out, if necessary. The coast was close, but not close enough to gamble the entire crew. One by one, men prepared to jump. Some stayed, some went. Benno waited. When he finally left his turret, the bomber was already dying. Flames trailed from a wing. The aircraft shuddered. He clipped on his parachute, moved to the hatch, and jumped into occupied China. The sky that had been his shield became silent, and the ground below belonged entirely to the enemy. By the third mission, something strange began happening in the skies over China. Japanese pilots were experienced men. They had fought Americans before. They knew the drill. Tracer fire meant danger. Follow the glowing lines, identify the gun position, angle your attack, and destroy the bomber piece by piece. It was a system that worked until it didn't. When the Zero fighters closed in on the American formation this time, they expected the sky to light up like it always did. It did in single quotes. 2. No glowing arcs. No orange streaks. No warning. The first Zero simply fell apart. The pilot never even fired a shot. Witnesses later said it looked unreal, like the aircraft had hit an invisible wall. One moment, it was diving toward the bomber. The next, its engine shattered, its wing ripped open, flames swallowing the cockpit. The Japanese formation broke instinctively, confused and shaken. For the gunner inside the bomber, this was exactly the point. Invisible fire didn't just kill, it disoriented. Japanese pilots were trained to read the sky. Without tracers, they lost their visual map. They couldn't tell where the danger was coming from. Every approach became a gamble. Every second spent searching for glowing bullets was a second too long, and the gunner exploited that hesitation mercilessly. He didn't spray bullets. He didn't pick. He waited. He tracked aircraft silently, calculating speed, distance, angle, then fired short, controlled bursts. No wasted ammunition. No wasted movement. Each burst was a prediction, not a reaction. 1 0 after another entered his invisible kill zone. By the time the surviving Japanese pilots pulled away, several of their aircraft were gone, destroyed by a bomber gunner they couldn't see, firing bullets they couldn't track. Back at base, something unprecedented happened. Crewmen from other bombers approached quietly. They weren't celebrating. They were asking questions. Why didn't your guns glow? How did you hit them so cleanly? What are you doing differently? The gunner didn't boast. He explained the logic. Tracer rounds help aim, but they also give away your position. Against fast, disciplined pilots, visibility was a liability. Remove the glow. Remove the target. Some listened. Some didn't. Those who ignored the lesson continued to lose gunners. Those who adopted it lived longer. Word spread informally, quietly, from crew to crew. Official doctrine didn't change, not yet. Military bureaucracy moves slowly, especially in wartime. But survival moves fast. And then came the mission that would seal the gunner's reputation forever. A flight so deep into enemy-controlled territory that returning alive was considered unlikely. For the gunner, it would become the deadliest mission of his life. Not because he was hunted, but because the enemy finally realized something terrifying. They weren't being attacked by luck. They were being hunted by calculation. The Americans believed they had found an edge. What they didn't understand yet was that every advantage in war has a lifespan. By late 1943, Japanese intelligence officers were no longer dismissing bomber losses as bad luck. Reports coming back from surviving Zero pilots shared a disturbing pattern. Aircraft were being destroyed without visible tracer fire. No glowing arcs. No warning. Just sudden, precise destruction. Something was wrong, and the Japanese were very good at identifying patterns. They began to adjust. Instead of aggressive head-on attacks, fighters started approaching from unexpected angles. Higher altitude dives. Steeper deflection shots. Faster They tested the bomber formations, probing for weaknesses like surgeons searching for an artery. For the gunner, this changed everything. Invisible fire worked best when the enemy followed predictable behavior. Once unpredictability entered the equation, skill alone was no longer enough. Every engagement became a calculation under pressure, not just of aim, but of survival. On one mission, the bombers flew deeper than ever before. Enemy territory stretched endlessly beneath them. Rivers twisted like scars across the land. Mountains rose sharply, giving Japanese fighters natural cover to climb unseen. Radio chatter was tense. Crews knew this was not a routine flight. When the attack came, it came differently. Zeros didn't rush in groups. They came in singles and pairs. Silent, fast, slashing through the formation like knives. One bomber exploded before anyone could react. Another fell burning, spiraling toward the earth. The gunner felt the aircraft shudder as rounds struck nearby fuselage panels. This wasn't confusion anymore. This was adaptation. He adjusted instantly. Shorter bursts, longer tracking, firing only when a hit was mathematically unavoidable. Every pull of the trigger had to count, because now, every enemy pilot was learning. Then something went wrong. A violent impact slammed into the bomber's side. The aircraft lurched. Alarms screamed. The intercom erupted with overlapping voices, damage reports, shouted orders, fear leaking through professionalism. The bomber was hit. Fuel pressure dropped. Controls stiffened. One engine began coughing. Smoke. They were still over enemy land, and now they were wounded. Japanese fighters circled like sharks. This was the moment when doctrine said survival was unlikely. Damaged bomber was supposed to drop out of formation. Once isolated, it became a slow, dying target. Most crews didn't last more than minutes, but the gunner refused to let that happen. He shifted angles, covered blind spots others couldn't reach. His firing was calm, methodical, almost cold. 1-0 came too close, misjudging the silence. It never pulled away. Another tried to finish the damaged bomber from below. It vanished in smoke. The remaining Japanese pilots finally disengaged, not because they were out of ammunition, but because they were out of certainty. The bomber limped back across miles of hostile terrain, leaking fuel, wounded but alive. When it landed, ground crews stared in disbelief. The aircraft should not have returned. Debriefing officers asked questions that had no official answers. How many enemy fighters destroyed? How did a damaged bomber survive coordinated attacks? Why were enemy tactics changing? No one wrote down the real answer because the real answer challenged doctrine. Suggested that survival in the air wasn't about bravery or volume of fire. It was about denying the enemy information. And then came the mission that erased the gunner from history. A flight so deep, so dangerous, that contingency planning assumed capture was inevitable. When the bomber failed to return, paperwork marked crew as missing. Combat records stopped. The invisible fire went silent, and the war moved on, leaving behind a question no one bothered to chase. What happens when the most effective weapon on the aircraft disappears without explanation? The bomber never made it home, at least, not the way history prefers its stories to end. Somewhere over occupied China, fuel finally ran out. The wounded aircraft, already pushed far beyond its limits, began losing altitude. Mountains closed in. Dense forests spread beneath them like a dark ocean. There would be no miracle landing, no escort, no rescue fighters. The crew knew the truth before the engines went silent. They prepared for impact. When the bomber came down, it didn't crash and fire like so many others. It tore through trees, metal screaming, wings shattering, momentum finally dying in a violent, grinding stop. Silence followed, broken only by fire, smoke, and men trying to understand whether they were alive. Some of the crew survived the impact. That would prove to be both a blessing and a curse. Local villagers reached the wreck first. Then Japanese patrols. Occupied territory moved fast when an American aircraft went down. Within hours, armed soldiers surrounded the crash site. Wounded airmen were dragged from wreckage, blindfolded, beaten, separated. The gunner was taken alive. And that is where the official story ends. No combat report explains what happened next. No mission log records his fate. No medals were processed. His name was filed under a category the military hated more than death. Missing in action. In reality, he was very much alive, just invisible again. Captured airmen in occupied China were not treated as prisoners of war. They were interrogated as threats. Japanese intelligence wanted to know tactics, formations, weaknesses, but when they questioned the gunner, the answers didn't fit their expectations. He wasn't an officer. He wasn't a strategist. He wasn't supposed to matter. And yet their pilots were dead because of him. Interrogations intensified. They wanted to know why tracer fire was missing, how bomber gunners were suddenly killing fighters without warning, whether this was a new American doctrine or the work of a single mind. The gunner gave them nothing useful. What followed was disappearance by bureaucracy. He was moved. Records were altered. Locations changed. Like so many others swallowed by the chaos of war, he became a ghost inside enemy territory. No Red Cross updates. No confirmations. No survival notices sent home. Back in the United States, his absence barely registered. Bomber gunners were not heroes in headlines. Fighter aces sold newspapers. Generals sold strategy. Enlisted men who quietly changed how war was fought were inconvenient, especially when they didn't survive to tell their own story. The war accelerated. Bigger battles, bigger bombs, new technologies, radar, jets, nuclear fire, and the invisible fire that once ruled the skies faded from memory. After the war ended, investigations focused on victories, not anomalies. Missing men stayed missing. Files gathered dust. A single gunner's record, incomplete. Fragmented, didn't justify the effort. So history did what it often does best. Simplified. Enemy losses were attributed to air combat. Tactical shifts were credited to experience. Survival was called luck, and the man who proved that information, denial could be deadlier than firepower, vanished from the narrative completely. No grave, no confirmation, no recognition. Just a quiet absence, where a revolutionary idea once lived. But buried inside old mission reports and pilot testimonies was a pattern, waiting to be noticed. And decades later, someone finally did. Years passed. Decades, really. The war became history, neatly packaged in textbooks, documentaries, and archival photos. Fighter aces received glory, medals, headlines. Their names were spoken aloud, memorized in classrooms, immortalized in news. Enlisted bomber gunners. Most faded into anonymity. Records existed, but they were buried in cabinets, forgotten in yellowed files. And yet, somewhere in the National Archives, a single folder sat, untouched, waiting. Combat reports, gun camera footage, handwritten notes, all evidence of one man's extraordinary skill. Technical Sergeant Arthur Bano, the gunner who had redefined defensive aerial tactics. It wasn't a historian who stumbled upon him first. It was a graduate student, chasing a thesis on tactical evolution in World War II air combat. He needed something tangible, a case study to show how enlisted men influenced outcomes in the Pacific Theater. Most papers focused on pilots, most lectures ignored the gunners. But the folder caught his eye. A B-24 named Goon, a record of kills unmatched by any gunner, even compared to fighter pilots, and an entry noting no tracers used, innovation credited. He read through the accounts, each line more unbelievable than the last. 7 kills in one mission, 16 in total, all without tracer rounds revealing his position. He cross-referenced pilot statements, gun camera footage, timestamps, crew testimonies, everything corroborated. Bano had done the impossible. The story had been hidden not because it was false, but because it didn't fit the narrative. Enlisted gunners were not celebrated. They didn't get medals that made headlines. Their actions, however, saved hundreds of lives. Bano's innovation, simply removing tracer ammunition, reduced mortality among gunners across multiple air forces. A tactic so simple, yet lethal, it became standard practice, shaping aerial combat for years. When the student presented his findings, the Air Force historians initially were skeptical. Could one gunner really have achieved this? Could he have influenced tactical doctrine across the 14th Air Force, the 10th Air Force, and the 20th Air Force? Gun camera footage proved it. His actions were deliberate, trained, precise. Each kill meticulously documented, each enemy fighter eliminated by invisible fire. Soon, the story began to circulate in military history circles. Articles appeared in journals. Blogs chronicled the forgotten hero. Military forums debated the ethics, strategy, and genius of Bano's method. Slowly, awareness grew. Veterans who had served alongside him recognized his name. Families of surviving crew members shared their memories. And while no medal could undo history, recognition finally arrived, decades too late. Even the National Geographic photo that once quietly documented his confident stance beside Goon was re-examined. Historians noted every detail: his crossed arms, the unflinching gaze, the posture of a man who had mastered his craft. The photograph, taken in October 1943, suddenly held new significance. It was not a casual studio shot. It was a portrait of a strategist, a marksman, a man whose contribution was invisible yet deadly. Meanwhile, his daughter's brief appearance at the Legion of Merit ceremony in Arizona had faded into memory. Photographs stored in family albums, now rediscovered, revealed a small girl standing beside her mother, receiving recognition on her father's behalf. These fragments painted a picture of a life both celebrated and erased. Heroic yet UNACKNOWLEDGED. By the late 20th century, Bano's name appeared in academic studies, military retrospectives, and online databases of aerial gunners. Analysts compared kill counts across theaters, confirming Benno's 16 victories, the highest ever for a gunner killed in action. Even Technical Sergeant Michael Areth, with 17 European theater kills, had survived the war. Benno had not. His record, his tactics, and his life were complete, yet incomplete in public memory. What remained most astonishing was the simplicity of his innovation. Removing tracers, trusting training over regulation, relying on skill, not spectacle. He had fundamentally altered defensive aerial gunnery. Yet nobody remembered him until archival dust forced the truth into the light. Modern military doctrine, unknowingly, still used the principle he had proven. Invisible fire is more effective than advertising your location. Benno's legacy persisted in ways few realized. Survival rates improved. Bomber crews trained with his method. Training manuals referenced his innovation indirectly. Young airmen in the Cold War and beyond, flying jets and strategic bombers, unknowingly benefited from the lessons he had proven in 1943. Invisible fire became doctrine. Silent victories shaped outcomes. Historians marveled at the paradox. A man who had saved hundreds of lives, killed 16 enemy fighters, and changed air combat tactics, had remained officially MIA. His body never recovered. He had died in enemy hands, erased from immediate history, yet his impact endured by the early 21st century. Benno's story was being taught in specialized military courses. Tactical manuals described scenarios eerily similar to the B-24 engagements over China. Students marveled at the ingenuity, the risk, the audacity of an enlisted man defying regulations, trusting his own skill. His philosophy, see the line before it shows itself. Kill the enemy without giving him warning. Even now, visitors to the Manila American cemeteries see the tablets of the missing. Benno's name is carved in stone, alongside thousands of others whose fates were uncertain. Few recognize the genius, the courage, the tactical brilliance behind the name. But military historians, archivists, and scholars who discovered the story understand. History may have forgotten him for decades, but his lessons outlived the war, outlived the bureaucracy, outlived the memory of those who should have celebrated him. In classrooms, documentaries, and tactical simulations, his shadow persists, invisible, deadly, and supremely skilled. Technical Sergeant Arthur Benno is gone, yet his fire continues, unseen, but never truly extinguished. And that is why, even 70 years later, when the skies are silent and memorials fade, one gunner's invisible fire remains a lesson for all. Courage is not in recognition, it is in action. Innovation is not in fame, it is in survival. And a single man can rewrite the rules of combat without a single headline. The skies over China had long since cleared of war. The bamboo groves, rice paddies, and shattered villages had healed, nature reclaiming what humanity had torn apart. But in quiet corners of military history, one story remained alive, whispered among historians, archivists, and a few surviving veterans. The story of Technical Sergeant Arthur Benno, the B-2 for gunner whose invisible fire reshaped aerial combat. It was almost poetic, almost cruel, that a man who had killed 16 enemy fighters, saved hundreds of American lives, and innovated tactics that spread across the Pacific theater, had vanished from immediate memory. His body never recovered. Classified MIA, assumed KIA, by November 15, 1943, yet his influence was everywhere, invisible yet omnipresent, like the tracerless rounds he once fired from the top turret of Goon. Military historians now understood the full scope of Benno's genius. His removal of tracer rounds was not a mere eccentricity, it was a tactical revolution. By eliminating a visible line leading enemy fighters directly to a gunner, Benno changed the probability of survival for entire bomber crews. Loss rates dropped, squadrons adapted his technique, manuals were rewritten, new generations of gunners unknowingly applied the principles he pioneered. In 1943, a single man had rewritten defensive aerial strategy. In 2000, it remained standard doctrine, but recognition remained delayed. Fighter aces officers were remembered in print, in film, in parades. Enlisted gunners, no matter their kills or their innovations, were footnotes. Benno had been denied the Medal of Honor despite having more confirmed kills than many recognized fighter pilots. Instead, he received the Legion of Merit posthumously. The Purple Heart arrived with the knowledge of his death, a reminder of the gap between courage and fame. In Bisbee, Arizona, his hometown quietly honored him. A small cenotaph on Highway 90 stood as a testament to a life lost too soon. Locals stopped occasionally, reading the inscription, unaware of the full story behind the name. Across the Pacific, the Republic of China included his name among the aviation martyrs, memorialized in Nanjing. His presence existed in monuments, archives, and the shadows of history. Yet for the wider world, he was unknown. By the late 20th and early 21st century, Benno's story was rediscovered. Military journals detailed his exploits. University theses referenced his innovation. War documentaries, YouTube channels, and online military forums highlighted his skill, ingenuity, and bravery. Students of air combat learned about the quiet man who had fired 648 rounds in one mission without a single tracer, killing 5 enemy aircraft in 8 minutes, and rising to 16 confirmed kills over 2 missions. His photograph from National Geographic, taken just weeks before the Hong Kong mission, became iconic among military historians. Benno stands beside Goon, arms crossed. Expression. The picture framing him not as a soldier, but as a master of his craft, disciplined, precise, unflinching. Every wrinkle in his uniform, every gleam on his boots, every shadow on the plane reflected a man whose expertise had been forged through 15 years of competitive shooting, thousands of rounds fired at the range, and an unrelenting dedication to understanding ballistics. Yet what moved people most was the principle behind the photograph. Benno's story was not about glory. It was about survival, discipline, and intelligence. Courage, he had shown, was not always in the spotlight. It could be in the subtle removal of tracer rounds, in trusting skill over regulation, in calculating probability, and in acting decisively under pressure. A man could rewrite tactics not by shouting orders, but by quietly observing, analyzing, and acting. The legacy of Benno extended beyond World War II. Modern military aircraft, fighter jets, and even drone operations applied similar principles. Invisible fire, stealth tactics, calculated risk, all part of the lineage that began with a single gunner in a B-24 over China. His story became a case study, not only in gunnery but in innovation under constraints. It demonstrated how individual initiative could ripple across entire branches of military operations, affecting doctrine decades later. Arthur Benno's family, though distant and largely unaware, held pieces of his life. The Legion of Merit he posthumously received rested in archives. The small photographs from Chiang Kong, once forgotten, were rediscovered in military libraries. His daughter, who had stood beside her mother at a modest ceremony in 1944, had passed without marrying. The family line ended, but Benno's influence did not. The man who disappeared into enemy hands at 32 lived on through the changes he inspired, through the lives he saved, through the tactics he left behind. Even now, veterans who had flown B-24s in later conflicts referenced the tracerless method in memoirs and interviews. In classrooms, cadets learned that sometimes the simplest solutions, removing a variable, trusting skill over convention, could save more lives than the flashiest weaponry. Benno's philosophy was distilled into a single enduring lesson: see the line before it shows itself, and strike with precision that leaves no trace. Arthur Benno's story is, at its core, a story of invisibility and impact. He was unseen in life and in death, yet his influence was indelible. A man who trusted his own skill, defied regulations, and rewrote tactics without fanfare. 16 confirmed kills, hundreds of lives saved, innovation adopted across multiple air forces. A legacy carried silently through the decades, rediscovered by those willing to look, understand, and honor the invisible fire of a forgotten hero. In the end, Benno's life reminds us that heroism does not always wear medals, does not always make headlines, and does not always survive in memory. Sometimes, heroism is quiet, calculated, and unseen, leaving effects that outlive the man, changing the course of history without ever demanding recognition. And that is the story of Technical Sergeant Arthur Benno, a man who fired invisible fire, who survived with skill, who innovated with courage, and who left a mark on history far greater than fame could measure.